I saw my brother freezing outside a gas station after I drove 200 miles through a snowstorm to find him. That sentence still burns in my chest like a brand, because never in my wildest nightmares did I think my life would unravel into such a picture of betrayal and desolation. The image of him standing there, hunched over, arms wrapped tight against a body shivering in the merciless wind, is seared into my mind. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. But it is not only the snowstorm or the cold that carved this memory so deeply into me. It was the cruel irony of everything I had given up for him, everything I had sacrificed to make sure he never had to suffer. And yet there he was, abandoned, discarded, and reduced to nothing more than a beggar outside a run-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. How do you begin to put into words the mixture of grief and fury that rushes into you in such a moment? I had spent my entire life carrying that boy. From the time he was small and our parents were too distracted, too careless, too selfish to notice him, I stepped in. I paid for his school books when they laughed at the cost. I bought him clothes so he would never feel less than the other children. And I worked hours my body could scarcely bear just to make sure he could walk into his future without the weight of poverty crushing him. I promised myself that he would never feel abandoned the way I had. And yet, standing in front of that gas station, snow biting my face and ice clawing at my lungs, I saw him exactly that abandoned, but not by me. By those he chose over me. By those he thought would give him the world, when all they ever wanted was to drain him dry and leave him to rot. The betrayal is what twists the knife. It was not as though I had not warned him, not as though I had not begged him to see through their honeyed words and arrogant smiles. But youth is often blind, and greed is deafening. He turned away from me, spat on the hand that had raised him, and cast me aside like I was nothing more than a relic, a stumbling old man who had outlived his usefulness. And so I left him to his choices. I walked away, swearing never to let his ingratitude poison me again. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. To see him like that, shoulders trembling under the weak yellow light of the gas station sign, to see him fighting the storm with nothing but the scraps of false pride left in him, it broke something in me, but it also lit a fire. This story is not just about a brother found freezing after a snowstorm. It is about betrayal, sacrifice wasted, and the justice that was long overdue. That moment at the gas station was not an ending. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and you won't believe how far it went. The snowstorm began as nothing more than a whisper on the horizon, a light flurry dancing against the windshield. But soon it grew into a howling wall of white that swallowed the road whole and left me clutching the steering wheel with hands that ached from the tension of holding on. 200 miles is a long distance under the best of conditions. But that night it felt like I was driving across an endless wasteland, every mile another battle against a storm that seemed determined to bury me where I sat. The wipers screeched against the glass, fighting a losing war against the thick sheets of snow, and the heater coughed out weak bursts of warmth that did little to keep the chill from sinking into my bones. My eyes burned from staring into the void of white ahead, searching for the faintest outline of a road that had all but disappeared, and my breath fogged the inside of the car as though I were already encased in ice. I had asked myself more than once if I should turn back, if it was worth it, but the thought of him out there somewhere, stranded or worse, burned hotter than the frost creeping into my joints. I told myself that I would not forgive myself if I gave up, that I would not allow the storm to dictate the ending to our story. I pressed the accelerator just enough to keep momentum, though every gust of wind shoved against the car like a giant hand, trying to sweep me into the ditches hidden beneath drifts of snow. Each time the tires slipped, my heart leapt into my throat, but I forced myself forward, mile after mile, my knuckles white against the wheel. The radio had long since gone silent, nothing but static filling the cabin, so I was left alone with my thoughts, each one heavier than the snow piling up on the hood. I thought about the times I had driven him to school, the times I had rushed across town to bail him out of some reckless mistake, and how many nights I had stayed awake wondering if he would ever understand the price of my sacrifices. Those memories clashed with the last bitter image of him turning his back on me, mocking me with the same arrogance he had learned from the people who used him. That sting was worse than the storm, and it drove me forward with a determination I didn't know I had left. The storm was merciless, clawing at the car, whistling through the smallest cracks, but it could not break me. I kept reminding myself that he was out there, somewhere ahead, and that my journey through the blizzard was not just about survival, it was about confrontation, about looking him in the eye and showing him the weight of his betrayal, even if I had to crawl across frozen ground to get there. 200 miles of ice, darkness, and fear could not stop me, because nothing compared to the storm that had already torn through my heart. The gas station emerged from the storm like a mirage, its flickering neon sign half buried in snow and glowing weakly against the black void of the night. And for a moment, I wondered if exhaustion was finally driving me to see things that weren't there. But then my headlights caught the shape of a man huddled near the entrance, bent over like a tree broken by years of wind, his arms wrapped tight around his chest, as though he could hold in the last scraps of warmth life had left him. I slammed the brakes, the tires screaming against the ice, and I just sat there staring, unable to move, because I knew that figure, even though I had tried so hard to forget him, even though I had sworn to bury the pain of his betrayal, it was my brother. His face was pale, lips trembling blue, his hair crusted with frost, and he was shaking so violently that it looked as if the storm itself was rattling his bones. He didn't see me at first, too lost in his battle against the cold, but I saw him, and with that sight came a rush of memories that hit me harder than any wind that night. I remembered the boy he once was, running across a field with a grin so wide it lit up everything around him, the child who would curl up next to me on nights when the power went out and whisper that he wasn't afraid because he had me. I remembered the teenager who came to me for money, promises spilling from his lips like they meant something, promises that turned to dust once he found others willing to flatter him and feed his ego. And I remembered the last time we spoke, his eyes full of contempt, his words sharp enough to cut deeper than any knife, telling me I was old, bitter, and holding him back from the life he deserved. Now here he was, not proud, not defiant, not victorious, but broken, a discarded pawn in the cruel games of people who only valued him for what he could give. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not just from the cold, but from the war raging inside me, rage and pity clashing, betrayal and sorrow interwoven until I could hardly breathe. Part of me wanted to leave him there, to let him taste the consequences he had chosen. But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime protecting him, screamed at me to act, to pull him from the snow before it consumed him entirely. I opened the car door, the wind lashing my face like knives, and as I stepped out onto the ice, I locked eyes with him for the first time in years. In those eyes I saw recognition, shame, and something else, something I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy, fear. That sight didn't just chill me, It ignited something deep inside, a realization that this night wasn't just about finding him, it was about reckoning with every memory that had led us both here. He was never just my younger brother. Not to me, not to the boy who should have been free to live his own youth, but instead carried the weight of raising another child before he was even ready for the world himself. Because when our parents slipped away into their own selfish pursuits and left him hungry, cold, and desperate for affection, I stepped in and became everything they refused to be. The one who held his hand through the dark nights, the one who shielded him from the bullies who mocked his torn shoes, the one who worked extra shifts just so he could have new clothes when the school year began. And I can still remember the look on his face the first time I gave him a brand new jacket, his smile brighter than the sun, his little arms wrapping around me as if he finally felt safe. I taught him how to ride a bike, running alongside him until my legs burned, cheering when he finally pedaled on his own. And when he fell and scraped his knee, it was my hands that wiped away the blood and my voice that told him he was strong enough to try again. I can see him sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread out, asking me for help with words too big for him, and even though I was exhausted from long hours at work, I sat down beside him and guided him through every problem because I wanted him to know he was never alone. When he cried at night, afraid of the dark or the shouting from the next room, I pulled him close and whispered stories of better days, painting dreams so vivid that even he could believe tomorrow would be brighter. I went without so he could have enough, skipped meals so he could eat, wore old shoes so he could step into new ones, and every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw the light in his eyes, when I heard his laughter filling the emptiness of a house our parents had abandoned. To me, he was not just a brother, he was a son, a responsibility I never asked for, but one I embraced because I refused to let him grow up feeling unloved. I remember watching him sleep, the way he would curl into the blanket I bought, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths, and I would promise myself over and over that I would protect him from everything I had suffered, that his life would be better than mine, no matter what it cost me. That bond, forged in years of sacrifice, was the foundation of everything, the reason I endured, the reason I believed family meant something sacred. And yet, looking back now, knowing where we ended up, I can't help but ask myself if all those nights of struggle, all those quiet promises I made to him in the dark, were nothing more than seeds planted in soil too shallow to ever bear fruit. It did not happen all at once. It never does. The slow drift of someone you love pulling away is like watching a ship sail from shore. So gradual at first, you hardly notice, until one day the horizon is empty, and you realize you are alone. And that is how it was with my brother, the boy I had raised, the boy who once clung to me as his anchor, now slipping free and drifting into the hands of people who looked at me not as family, but as a resource to exploit and discard. I began to see the changes when he was still young, when his new circle of friends appeared, boys and girls who had never known struggle, children of parents with money, with big cars and easy smiles, the type who sneered at my old coat and the beat-up car I drove to 3 different jobs, but who praised him when he distanced himself from me, feeding him lines about how he deserved more, how he was destined for bigger things than the life of sacrifice and humility I had shown him. I watched as their words sank in, poisoning him against me, and soon he began repeating them, his voice laced with disdain when he asked why I worked so hard and yet had so little, why I insisted on being content with survival when he was meant for greatness. It hurt more than any insult from a stranger because those words came from him, from the lips of the boy I had given everything for, and though they were not his words originally, the echo of his so-called friends and later certain family members who always circled like vultures, they still cut me to the bone. I could see the manipulations in plain sight, the way an aunt who had never lifted a finger to help us suddenly whispered in his ear about how I was holding him back, or the way cousins who never cared to share a meal with us suddenly invited him to parties where they mocked me behind closed doors, telling him I was nothing more than a bitter old fool clinging to control. And he listened. That was the betrayal. Not just that they poisoned him, but that he let them, that he allowed the seed of contempt to grow where there had once been gratitude. Slowly he stopped asking me for advice, stopped coming to me with his troubles, and when I did offer help, he brushed me aside, saying he didn't need me, that others understood him better. I would hear him on the phone, laughing with him, his voice bright with excitement, while mine grew hoarse from calling out warnings that went unheeded. It was like watching a wall rise between us, brick by brick, and with each layer he laid down, I felt the weight of my sacrifices crush me further, as if I had been erased from his story and rewritten as the villain holding him down. That was the beginning. The first fracture in the bond I thought unbreakable, and though I tried to mend it, though I reached out again and again, he chose to listen to those who saw me as expendable, and in choosing them he began to betray not just me but himself, though he would not realize it until it was far too late. The moment of ultimate betrayal was not a single knife thrust, but a slow twisting of the blade until I could no longer deny the truth, and though I had felt the tremors long before, nothing prepared me for the earthquake that shattered what remained of our bond, because it was not enough for him to distance himself. It was not enough for him to mock my sacrifices with the arrogance he borrowed from those who poisoned his mind. No, he went further. He joined them, the very people who had always seen me as nothing more than a stepping stone, and together they schemed to strip me of the little security I had built, clawing away at the dignity I had preserved through decades of labor and sacrifice. I remember the day I discovered the betrayal, sitting at the banker's office with papers in front of me that bore my brother's signature alongside theirs. Documents that transferred property I had worked my whole life to maintain, property I had entrusted to him out of love and faith, believing he would safeguard it as part of our family's future, only to find he had sold it off, pocketed the profit, and laughed behind my back with those ingrates who congratulated him for finally cutting the old fool out of the picture. My hand shook as I traced the ink, my vision blurring with a rage so sharp I could hardly breathe, and in that moment I heard their voices in my memory, the cruel laughter, the dismissive words, the times they called me obsolete, a relic, a man too weak to realize he was being drained dry. And there he was, my brother, standing among them, smiling as though he had won some great prize, as though betraying the one person who had given everything for him was proof of his strength. They did not just take money. They took respect. They humiliated me, sending letters that mocked me when I protested, spreading lies to neighbors about my supposed incompetence, painting me as bitter and senile, while they paraded around in the fruits of my labor. And when I confronted him directly, when I looked into his eyes and begged him to explain, to tell me why, he turned cold, his voice sharp, saying he owed me nothing, that everything I had done for him had been my choice, and that my time of control was over. Those words broke something in me, not just because of the cruelty, but because they revealed a truth I had fought against for years. He no longer saw me as his brother, no longer remembered the nights I held him close, when no one else cared, no longer valued the sacrifices I made so he could walk freely into the life he thought he deserved. In that moment, I lost more than money, more than property. I lost the illusion that love and loyalty had meaning in his heart. I walked away stripped bare, humiliated in front of those who had always despised me. And though my chest ached with grief, somewhere beneath that pain a colder fire began to burn. A fire that whispered this would not be the end, that justice would come, and that one day he would learn the true cost of betrayal. I sat alone in the silence of my house, the walls echoing with memories that now felt like mockery. And as I stared at the empty spaces once filled with the laughter of a boy I had raised, all I could feel was the weight of every sacrifice I had made being spat upon as worthless, as if decades of toil and sleepless nights had been nothing more than ashes scattered in the wind. I remembered the years I worked double shifts just to pay his school fees, the long hours spent cleaning, building, and breaking my back so that he could walk into a classroom with his head held high. While I went home, too exhausted to eat, I remembered the times I covered his rent when he first stumbled into adulthood, the times I dug into my own pockets to bail him out of debt, always telling myself he just needed one more chance, that if I gave a little more, pushed a little harder, he would finally see the value of what I had done for him. I remembered the groceries I bought for him when he couldn't be bothered to budget, the car I fixed so he could drive to work, the endless list of small rescues and large sacrifices that became the rhythm of my life. And I told myself it was love, that it was duty, that one day he would look back and understand. But instead, he turned all of it into a weapon, sneering that I had chosen this life, that I had shackled him with pity disguised as generosity, and that he owed me nothing for the years I bled to keep him afloat. To hear those words from his mouth was like being struck by lightning, sudden and searing, burning away every illusion I had clung to about the bond we once shared. I thought of the jacket I bought him when he was small, the way his eyes had lit up, and now I saw only how quickly that gratitude had faded, replaced by entitlement that grew each time I gave without asking anything in return. I thought of the nights I went hungry so he could eat, and how he later mocked my frugality, laughing with his new friends about the old fool who never knew how to live. I thought of the times I wiped away his tears and steadied his trembling hands, and how those same hands signed away my security as though it were nothing more than a business transaction. The pain of it hollowed me out, left me sitting in that chair with my head in my hands, wondering if my life had been wasted on someone who saw me not as a brother, but as a convenience to be drained and discarded. My perception of him, of us, shattered in that moment, and in the fragments I saw the truth I had denied for too long. Love given without respect becomes weakness in the eyes of the ungrateful, and every sacrifice I had made was not a treasure he cherished, but a debt he despised. I told myself I was finished, that I could not keep setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm, not when that someone had already spat on the flames and walked away laughing. So I made the decision to cut the cord, to step back from the wreckage of what had once been a bond stronger than blood, and I told myself I would never return. I remember packing away the last remnants of him from my home, a few shirts he had left behind, a broken watch I once repaired for him. And as I placed them in a box, my hands trembled because I knew I wasn't just putting away things, I was putting away years of my life. I walked through each room and heard the echoes of our past, the arguments, the laughter, the quiet moments when I believed we were inseparable, and I forced myself to shut the door on those memories, even though they clung to me like chains. I told myself I was not abandoning him, I was freeing myself, because there is a difference between loyalty and servitude, and I had been a servant to his ingratitude long enough. Yet the pain lingered like an open wound, raw and festering, because how do you erase the image of the child you once carried on your shoulders, the boy who once looked at you like you hung the moon, when now he looked at you as nothing more than an obstacle to be crushed? I walked away, but every step was heavy, every mile of distance carved deeper into me, and though I told myself over and over that I was done, that I owed him nothing, a part of me still ached with the question of why. Why wasn't the love I gave enough? Why weren't the sacrifices I made worthy of respect? Why did he choose the voices of manipulators and leeches over the hand that had fed him his whole life? I told myself to let go, but my heart refused to obey, and even in silence, even in solitude, the wound bled. Still, I pressed on, building a wall around myself, convincing my weary soul that I would never again lower it for someone who had torn it apart. I swore to myself I would never return to that battlefield, never again let him close enough to wound me, and though the pain throbbed with every breath, I embraced it, because pain at least was honest, unlike the empty promises and false smiles that had destroyed me. Walking away was not peace, but it was survival, and survival was all I had left. The phone rang late in the evening when the house was silent and the air felt heavier than usual. And at first I considered letting it go unanswered, because after everything I had endured, after the years of sacrifice followed by betrayal, I had grown used to silence and had taught myself to avoid surprises. But something in the way it rang made me reach for it, my hand tightening around the receiver as though I already knew it would reopen wounds I had tried to seal. The voice on the other end was not one I recognized. A man who spoke quickly, almost nervously, as if he wasn't sure he should be making the call at all. He asked my name, confirmed who I was, and then, without preamble, told me he had seen my brother. He said the boy I had once raised, the man who had turned his back on me, was now out on the streets, drifting, abandoned, and had been spotted shivering in the cold outside a gas station on the edge of town. The stranger's voice carried a mix of pity and disgust as he explained how my brother had been cast aside by the very people he had chosen over me, how they had drained him of what little he had left before discarding him like garbage once he was no longer useful. He told me he didn't know why he felt compelled to call. Maybe it was the look in my brother's eyes when he begged for warmth, or maybe it was simply because he couldn't stand the cruelty of it. But he insisted I deserved to know. For a moment I couldn't breathe, the words freezing in my chest as though the storm outside had found its way into me, and I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles cracked. Memories came flooding back, the good and the bad tangled together in a knot I couldn't untie. And though part of me wanted to hang up, to dismiss the news as the consequence of choices he had made, another part of me, the part that had raised him, sacrificed for him, bled for him, couldn't let go. I asked questions, my voice sharper than I intended, demanding details, and the man told me the location, described the scene in blunt words that made it impossible to deny the truth. My brother was broken, lost, and freezing, left behind by the very hands he had once trusted more than mine. When I ended the call, I sat in the darkness of my living room, the silence pressing against me, and I realized that despite all my vows to stay away, despite all my anger, I could not ignore the image of him suffering. It wasn't forgiveness that stirred in me. No, it was something colder and sharper, the knowledge that fate had delivered him back into my sight, not for reconciliation, but for reckoning. I rose from my chair, every bone in my body aching, and I knew what I had to do. I had to find him, not just to face the sight of his downfall, but to confront the past and deliver the justice that had been denied for far too long. The road stretched before me once again, a black ribbon half buried beneath snow and shadow, and as I gripped the wheel and pushed forward into the night, the hum of the engine, was drowned out by the roar of my own thoughts, a storm inside me fiercer than the one clawing at the car. I was not just driving to rescue my brother. I knew that now. I was driving to confront him, to look him in the eye and let him see what his betrayal had carved into me, because this was not about pity or forgiveness. It was about justice, about balance finally being restored. Each mile marker that disappeared behind me felt like another year of sacrifice flashing in my mind. The tuition payments, the rent money, the bailouts, the countless hours I worked until my body begged for rest, all of it dismissed as if it had no meaning. And I asked myself again and again how he could throw it all away so carelessly. Rage and sorrow tangled inside me, but beneath them both was a cold resolve, the kind that hardens a man after he has been broken too many times. And I realized that I no longer feared his rejection, no longer feared his contempt, because the worst had already happened. What was left now was the reckoning. I thought of the people who had poisoned him, the smug smiles of the family members who whispered lies, the so-called friends who applauded every cruel word he threw at me, and I felt the fire rise in my chest, because they thought they had won. They thought they had drained me dry and left me with nothing but loneliness, but they had forgotten that a man who has nothing left to lose is the one they should fear most. As the snow hammered the windshield and the wind howled like a chorus of ghosts, I tightened my grip on the wheel and whispered promises into the night, not of reconciliation, but of exposure, of justice, of tearing away the masks those ingrates had worn for so long. I would find my brother. I would pull him from the cold, if only to ensure he lived long enough to face the truth, long enough to understand the cost of his betrayal and the futility of siding with those who never loved him. The thought steadied me, gave me strength as the tires slipped and the storm raged, and I knew this drive was not just about reaching him, it was about preparing myself, sharpening myself, so that when the moment came I would not falter. I pressed harder on the accelerator, eyes fixed ahead, heart heavy but unyielding, and I told myself that the time for silence and patience was over. The time for justice had come, and I would see it through no matter what waited for me at the end of that frozen road. The gas station lights hummed overhead, throwing pale circles into the swirling snow, and as I stepped closer, my boots crunching against the frozen ground, he finally looked up and his eyes widened with shock, his chapped lips parting as though he had seen a ghost. For a moment he said nothing, just stared, shivering so violently his whole body trembled, and then his voice cracked through the night, a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "You came? After everything, you came?" I stood there, silent, my breath a white cloud between us, until I finally answered, my tone calm, stripped of warmth. 200 miles through a storm, and there you are, right where they left you. He flinched, his eyes darting to the ground, then back to me, and I saw shame flicker there before arrogance rose to bury it. I need help, just this once. Lend me some money. Give me a place to stay. You always said family sticks together, didn't you? The words were hollow, rehearsed, the same tune he had played 1,000 times before, and I let them hang in the air like icicles ready to snap. Family, I repeated slowly, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You only remembered that word when you needed something. His jaw tightened, his voice sharpening with defensiveness. You don't understand what they promised me, the opportunities, the future I could have had if you hadn't held me down. I just made a mistake, that's all. You can fix this for me like you always do. He stretched a trembling hand toward me, the same hand that had signed away my security, the same hand that pushed me aside when I tried to warn him. And though his voice pleaded, the arrogance still leaked through. He believed, even now, that I would bend, that I would kneel at the altar of his need as I always had. I stepped closer, close enough to see the cracks in his pride, the way his teeth chattered between words. "I warned you," I said quietly. "I told you those people would use you, discard you, and still you chose them over me." His voice wavered, a thin edge of panic breaking through. "I didn't think they'd turn on me. I thought I was smarter than that. Please, I can't stay out here another night. You wouldn't leave me like this." The words clung to me, a desperate plea wrapped in the same arrogance that assumed I was still the fool he could exploit. I studied him in silence, letting the weight of the moment crush him, and though part of me still saw the boy I once raised, the boy I once protected from the cold, another part saw the man he had become, and that part knew this confrontation was not about rescue, but about truth. I let my voice cut through the storm, steady and cold. "No, I wouldn't leave you here to die. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. Tonight isn't about saving you. Tonight is about showing you what it feels like when the people you trust turn their backs and leave you in the cold." As I stood there staring into his pleading eyes, the storm biting at my skin and the shadows of our past wrapping around me tighter than the wind ever could, I felt the pull of old instincts urging me to give in, to scoop him up, to shield him from the consequences of his choices, just as I had done all his life. But something inside me had changed, hardened, and I knew with a clarity sharper than ice that pity alone would not heal what had been broken. If I gave in now, if I rescued him without condition, it would be nothing more than another chapter in the same story, another sacrifice wasted, another lesson unlearned, and I would not allow that cycle to repeat. He needed to face what he had done, not just to me, but to himself. To understand that betrayal carries weight, and that loyalty once shattered cannot be pieced together with apologies spoken only when desperation demands them. I thought of every manipulation that had brought us here. The whispers of family members who encouraged his contempt for me, the friends who lured him with false promises, the cruel laughter of those who mocked me as expendable while fattening themselves on the fruits of my labor, and I realized they were just as guilty as he was, if not more. They had poisoned him, yes, but he had chosen to drink, and now all of them would have to face the bitter taste of consequence. I could see the arrogance still clinging to him, even as he shivered. The belief that I would always bend, always forgive, always erase his mistakes with my own suffering. And that arrogance was the proof I needed. He was not here to reconcile. He was here to exploit me one last time, to use my love as a shield against the storm he had built with his own hands. I clenched my fists at my sides, the cold metal of my car keys digging into my palm, and I swore silently that I would not let pity blind me any more. No, I would help him survive this night, but only so he would be alive to face the justice that was coming, the justice I would deliver not in anger, but in methodical, deliberate precision. The manipulators who had profited from his betrayal would learn that the man they thought broken was not weak, that the patience they mistook for frailty was in fact steel waiting for the right moment to strike. And he, my brother, would learn that actions carve scars deeper than words, and that loyalty abandoned cannot be bought back with desperation. The cold resolve that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt before, and I welcomed it, because I understood now that love without accountability is not love at all, it is enslavement, and I had been enslaved to his needs for far too long. This time would be different. This time there would be consequences. The night after I pulled him from the cold, I lay awake in my chair staring at the ceiling, my brother asleep in the next room, wrapped in blankets like a child, and though exhaustion tugged at me, I did not close my eyes. Because the storm outside had passed, but the storm inside me had only just begun. I had seen enough to know that pity was not the answer, that his suffering was real, but so was the arrogance that clung to him even in desperation. And as I listened to the faint sound of his restless breathing, I realized that saving him from the snow was only the first step. Justice was the destination. So, while he slept, I reached for the phone and began to call the people who could make it happen. The first call was to a lawyer I trusted, a man who had handled cases for me in the past, quiet and meticulous, the kind of professional who did not waste words but made every one of them count. I explained what had been done to me, the property transfers, the financial betrayals, the signatures forged under false pretenses, and as I spoke, I could hear the sharp edge in his silence, the sound of gears turning as he pieced together the legal weapons we could wield. Then I contacted a banker, a woman who had always respected the way I scraped and clawed for every dollar I had, and when I told her the accounts had been drained, that my own blood had worked with others to strip me of security, she promised me in a low voice that she would help trace every cent, uncover every hidden move, and bring it all into the light. I did not stop there. I reached out to an investigator, a man with no patience for liars, someone who thrived on uncovering secrets people thought were buried. I told him about the so-called friends and family who had poisoned my brother, who had schemed against me, who had mocked me as they bled us both dry, and he assured me he would follow their trail until there was nowhere left for them to hide. Each call I made strengthened my resolve, each professional voice on the other end of the line a reminder that I was not powerless, that I was not the fool they believed me to be. They thought I was weak, too old, too weary to fight back, but what they had underestimated was the strength of a man who has carried the weight of others his entire life. Quietly, methodically, I began weaving the net that would catch them all, and as the plan took shape in my mind, I felt a grim satisfaction settle into my bones. This was no outburst of anger, no reckless lashing out. This was strategy, and once the pieces were in place, there would be no escape for any of them. They had mistaken my silence for surrender, but they were about to learn the truth. Silence can be the sharpest weapon of all, the pause before the strike that brings everything crashing down. The reports began trickling in one by one. Each phone call, each envelope, each email carrying pieces of a puzzle I had long suspected but never fully seen. And as the investigator laid out the details with a steady, clinical voice, the truth formed into something even uglier than I had imagined. The accounts I had worked my entire life to build, the savings that represented every aching muscle, every sleepless night, every sacrifice made in silence, had been systematically drained, funneled into shell accounts, controlled by those smug parasites who had whispered poison into my brother's ears. They had manipulated him into signing documents he barely understood, feeding his ego with promises of wealth and independence, convincing him that distancing himself from me was the key to his freedom. The banker confirmed that property transfers had been orchestrated with stunning precision, deeds rewritten and shifted under his name only to be flipped for quick profit, leaving nothing behind but debt and ashes in my ledger. The lawyer uncovered contracts buried in fine print, traps designed to strip me of ownership while absolving them of liability, all crafted to make it appear as though my brother had acted alone, a willing participant rather than the pawn he truly was. And then came the bitterest truth of all. Once they had bled him of everything he could give, once every cent and scrap of value had been pulled from his hands, they abandoned him without hesitation. The investigator described it with ruthless detail, how they had cut ties the moment his accounts ran dry, how they laughed in private about the boy who thought he was one of us, mocking him for being gullible enough to believe their lies. My brother, the same boy I had raised, the boy I had carried through hunger and hardship, had been used up like a tool and then discarded into the cold, left to freeze on the side of a gas station while they moved on to their next victim. I sat there listening to the reports, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and vindication, because everything I had warned him about, every truth I had tried to make him see, was laid bare before me in black and white. He had chosen them over me. He had called me a fool, and yet here was the proof that the real fools were those who believed they could strip me bare and walk away without consequence. I felt no pity for the manipulators, only a cold satisfaction in knowing that the rope they had tied around my brother's neck was about to tighten around their own. They thought they had left me broken, but what they had really done was give me the evidence I needed to destroy them. The betrayal was complete, yes, but so too was the revelation, and with every new truth uncovered, my resolve hardened into something unshakable. They had played their game, and now it was my turn. There are moments in life that etch themselves into your memory, like scars. Words that no matter how much time passes, you can still hear with perfect clarity. And for me, it was one night long before the collapse, long before the storm in the gas station, when I walked into a room I wasn't meant to enter, and heard the laughter that stripped me of any lingering illusions. My brother was there, his so-called friends draped around him like vultures circling a carcass, and they didn't notice me at first as I stood just beyond the door. One of them, a cousin who had never worked an honest day in his life, leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk that still burns in my mind, "Don't worry about him. He's just the old fool who doesn't know he's being used." The room erupted in laughter, my brother included, his voice carrying above the rest as he added, "Yeah, he thinks he's helping me, but really, he's just paying my way until I don't need him anymore." The cruelty of those words landed like a blow to the chest, sharper than any insult from a stranger, because they came from the very mouth I had once fed, the very heart I had once shielded. I remember standing frozen, my hand tightening on the doorknob, my jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would break, and in that moment I felt the ground beneath me shift. They thought they were clever, mocking me, reducing my years of sacrifice to the punchline of a cruel joke, and though I walked away without confronting them that night, the echo of their laughter followed me like a shadow. Those words became the ghost I carried, a reminder of how blind I had been, how naive in believing gratitude would ever outweigh greed. Even now I can still hear it. That phrase, like poison dripping into my ears. The old fool who doesn't know he's being used. It hardened something inside me, turned my pain into steel, because if that was how they saw me, then I would make sure they never forgot the truth of who I really was. Their cruelty didn't just wound me, it sharpened me. And every plan I set into motion carried the weight of that moment, the sting of betrayal transformed into a weapon they could never anticipate. They laughed at me once, but I swore they would not be laughing when I was done. I moved in silence, each step deliberate, each decision calculated, because vengeance is never louder than preparation. And I knew the only way to dismantle them was not through shouting or rage, but through the quiet precision of a man who has finally learned the cost of patience. My lawyer became my shadow, guiding me through the labyrinth of contracts and fraudulent transfers, helping me draft paperwork that would not only expose the lies, but unravel the foundation they had built on my back. Together we traced signatures, highlighted inconsistencies, gathered statements from notaries who had been coerced or bribed, and piece by piece we built a case so airtight that when it landed, there would be no escape. The banker worked in tandem, pulling records, digging through archives, uncovering hidden accounts that bled with proof of theft, each discovery another nail in their coffin. She moved quickly but discreetly, careful not to alert anyone that the tide was shifting, and each time her voice came through the phone, it carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew justice was already on its way. The investigator delivered photographs, transcripts, and records that spoke louder than any accusation I could ever make. Evidence of meetings behind closed doors, recordings of laughter at my expense, emails exchanged about how to squeeze the last bit of value from my brother before cutting him loose. All of it carefully catalogued. All of it prepared to strike like a trap, waiting for its prey. I signed documents with a steady hand, my resolve unshakable, and every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming another piece of my dignity. I did not confront them, not yet. I let them believe they were safe, let them live in their arrogance a little longer, because a predator never reveals itself before the kill. They still thought of me as the old fool, weakened, broken, too weary to fight back, and that was my greatest weapon. I played the role they had written for me, quiet, invisible, irrelevant, while behind the scenes the machinery of justice spun tighter and tighter around them. The legal trap was not about anger. It was about inevitability, a web woven with care so that when they finally realized what was happening, it would already be too late. And as the weeks passed and the net tightened, I felt a cold calm settle into me. They had stolen from me. They had mocked me. They had poisoned my brother, but they had underestimated me. Soon the world would see them for what they truly were: frauds, thieves, ingrates, and I would stand not as their victim, but as the man who brought them down without ever raising his voice. The room was warm with a hum of conversation, glasses clinking, laughter echoing off the walls. The same kind of gathering where they had once mocked me in hushed voices, certain I would never hear, and it was there that I chose to deliver the reckoning. I entered quietly, carrying a folder under my arm, and for a moment no one noticed me. Not until I stepped into the center of the room and their laughter faltered. My brother was there, looking uneasy, his eyes darting toward me with a mixture of shame and defiance. But it was the others, the smug cousins, the greedy in-laws, the parasitic friends whose faces twisted with irritation at my presence. One of them sneered, "What's he doing here?" And another muttered, "The old fool doesn't know when to quit." I let the words hang in the air before I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. "No," I said evenly, my voice steady but carrying enough weight to silence the room. "The old fool knows exactly what he's doing." I laid out the bank statements first, pages of transfers that traced the stolen money directly into their accounts, then the property deeds showing their manipulations, the forged signatures, the contracts designed to bleed me dry. Each sheet of paper was a nail hammered into the coffin of their arrogance, and as I spoke, their laughter curdled into sputters of denial. One cousin leapt to his feet, shouting that it was lies, that I had fabricated everything, but my lawyer, standing beside me now, cut him down with calm precision, citing dates, witnesses, and notarized statements. The banker added her voice, confirming the transfers, the hidden accounts, the undeniable truth of their theft. The room, once so loud, grew suffocatingly quiet, except for their outbursts. They clawed for excuses, accused each other in frantic desperation, and even turned on my brother, calling him the weak link, the gullible fool who had dragged them down. He stood there pale and trembling, his arrogance slipping as he realized he had never been their equal, only their pawn. I looked him in the eye, letting him see the cold fire in mine, and said, "They never respected you. They used you just as you used me. But the difference is, I warned you, and you chose not to listen." He tried to speak, to beg, but the words stuck in his throat as the weight of the truth crushed him. Around us, the antagonists raged, but their rage only exposed their desperation, their once proud arrogance collapsing under the undeniable proof laid bare for all to see. And in that moment, I felt no need to shout, no need to curse, because the evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Justice did not need anger. It needed truth, and the truth was finally inescapable. He stood there in the wreckage of his own making, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn, the weight of humiliation pressing down on him heavier than the snowstorm that had nearly killed him. And for the first time in years I saw my brother without the mask of arrogance, without the shield of false pride that had carried him into the arms of those who betrayed us both. His eyes darted to the documents scattered across the table, the evidence undeniable, and then to the faces of the very people who had once lifted him up with flattery, now sneering at him, calling him a fool, a liability, the weak link who had ruined everything. Their words cut into him with a cruelty he had never expected, and I watched as the realization dawned on him that he had never been their equal, never been their partner, only their tool. And now that he was broken, they had no use for him. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he finally forced the words past his lips. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, fragile, trembling, but it was enough to silence the room for a moment. He turned toward me, his eyes glistening with the kind of shame that comes too late, and whispered, "You were right. About all of it. About them. About me." His words stumbled over themselves, broken pieces of an apology he had never thought he would have to make, and though part of me longed to feel vindicated, another part ached with the bitter truth that no apology could undo the years of betrayal. He confessed through trembling lips how he had believed their promises, how he had thought standing with them made him stronger, more important, how he had convinced himself that I was the one holding him back, when in reality I had been the only one holding him up. His voice cracked when he admitted he had mocked me to earn their approval, that he had called me a fool because he was too blind to see the depth of my sacrifices, and that now, stripped of everything, he finally understood. The cold reality pressed down on him, and I could see it in his face. The dawning awareness that he had traded love for lies, loyalty for greed, and that the cost of those choices was everything. He covered his face with his hands, his body shaking not from the storm this time, but from the collapse of the illusion he had built his life around. He had thought himself clever, untouchable, but now he was just a man broken, humiliated, and bare before the truth. And as I watched him unravel, I felt no triumph, no joy, only the cold certainty that this reckoning was necessary, that he had to face the weight of his choices before there could be any path forward. The days that followed unfolded like the turning of a long-awaited tide, and for the first time in years I felt the current shift in my favor as the weight of evidence did what my words alone never could. The courts moved swiftly once the paperwork was filed, my lawyer presenting every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every bank record that painted the antagonists not as clever manipulators, but as petty thieves clawing at scraps they could never truly own. Their names, once spoken with arrogance at family gatherings and social events, became synonymous with deceit, and one by one their facades cracked under the pressure of public shame. Properties they had stolen were returned, accounts they had drained were seized, and the hollow empire they had built on lies collapsed into dust. My banker called me personally to confirm the reclamation of assets, her voice steady but tinged with satisfaction as she told me that everything they had stolen was being placed back into my hands where it belonged. I signed the final documents with a calm that surprised even me, not elation, not gloating, but a deep and steady peace, the kind that comes only when justice has been served. I walked through my reclaimed house, running my hands across the walls I had once built with sweat and sacrifice, and for the first time in a long time it felt whole again, not because of what was inside it, but because of what had been stripped from those who sought to destroy me. The antagonists, once so loud and self-assured, were now the subject of whispers, their disgrace spreading faster than fire in dry grass. Friends abandoned them, business partners severed ties, and even those who had once cheered their schemes turned their backs, unwilling to be tainted by the stench of exposure. They were ruined, socially and financially, their names forever tied to scandal, and I did not need to lift a finger further, for the truth itself had become their executioner. As for my brother, he lingered in the aftermath, silent and hollow, his pride shattered, his illusions burned away. I offered him no vengeance, no comfort, only the space to understand what it meant to face the consequences of his choices. Whether he learned from them or not was no longer my burden to carry. I had carried him for too long already. As I walked away from it all, stepping into the crisp air of a new morning, I felt the finality settle in my chest. The pain of betrayal would always remain a scar, but it no longer bled. I had reclaimed what was mine. I had exposed those who sought to ruin me, and I had secured the peace they thought I would never find. They called me the old fool, but in the end it was their arrogance that destroyed them, and it was my resolve that set me free. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, because no enemy from the outside can wound you the way someone you once loved can, and I learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible when the brother I had raised, the boy I had treated as my own son, turned his back on me and joined the very hands that sought to strip me bare. The scars of that betrayal will never vanish. They are etched into me as permanently as the memories of every sacrifice I made, every night I went without so he could have more, every time I thought love would be enough to bind us together. And yet, as much as those wounds still ache, I have come to understand that justice, no matter how cold, is the only warmth left in the aftermath of such treachery. The storm that night was not just the snow that blinded my path. It was the storm of lies, arrogance, and greed that had surrounded me for years. And when I finally stood in the center of it with the truth in my hands, I realized that survival alone was not enough. I needed vindication. I did not set out to destroy them with anger. I set out to let the truth speak, and in doing so, I reclaimed not only my home, my security, my dignity, but also a peace they believed I would never know again. My brother, humiliated and stripped of his illusions, will carry the weight of his choices for the rest of his days. And those who once mocked me as the old fool now live disgraced, their arrogance shattered, their reputations nothing more than ash in the wind. And me, I walk forward lighter, not because the pain is gone, but because I no longer carry their chains. Justice came, slow and merciless, and in its chill I found a strange kind of warmth, the warmth of freedom, of finality, of knowing that no matter how much they tried to bury me, I endured. They thought they had broken me, but in the end, it was their betrayal that broke them, and I emerged, not defeated, but unshaken. This is what I have learned. Love without respect is a weapon. Sacrifice without gratitude is a curse. And when family betrays you, the only path left is the one paved with truth. It may be cold, it may be lonely, but it is honest, and honesty, even when it freezes, is still the only fire that will never burn out. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.